Hello Internet, Seth Skórkowski, and today we're going to begin a little journey through the Traveler campaign, Secrets of the Ancients. Originally published in 1984 as Secret of the Ancients, notice the singular there, as Adventure 12 for Classic Traveler, and it was written by Mark Miller. It was a 48 digest-sized pages. Then in 2012 it was reimagined and expanded to a 198-page campaign by Gareth Hanrahan for Mongoose 1st Edition Traveler. And then in 2021 it was updated for Mongoose 2nd Edition at 256 pages, which is the version that we're going to be covering. The campaign itself is 10 adventures long, with one adventure leading into the next. It primarily takes place in the Regina subsector of the Spinward Marches, which the campaign provides us with this map for that. As the title suggests, it focuses on the Ancients, the mysterious and ultra-advanced race that ruled and shaped the galaxy hundreds of thousands of years ago. And what begins as a pretty simple, standard murder mystery ultimately leads to an epic campaign spanning time and dimensions and can lead to the heroes ultimately saving or destroying the galaxy. Now, one of the big things that drew me into this campaign is while I hadn't been wanting something that was as long as 10 adventures, I was looking for more of a medium 6 to 8 adventure campaign. Each scenario in this one follows its own theme, giving us a wide assortment of what it is we can play. There's an espionage one, a dungeon crawl, one is designed like an old-time disaster movie, there's a murder mystery, there's a prison break, there's a whole lot that this campaign offers. Now, one of the things that I thought when I first read it was, well, it is most definitely a Traveler campaign. Something about it really just felt like an epic Call of Cthulhu campaign, which is awesome. I mean, that's one of my favorite systems of all time. And then I learned that the author also wrote for Trail of Cthulhu and Fall of Delta Green, which makes complete sense of why it felt like that. Now, the Travelers do not need their own starship to do this adventure, and the only book that you require is the core rulebook, though I also suggest having a copy of Highguard, the Central Supply Catalog, and Aliens of Chartered Space Volume 2 for information on the join. The campaign also comes with booklets of handouts as well as a library data booklet that I love. It's basic information that they might need of the various planets or other things that they might encounter, sort of like a representation of looking up information on a ship's library. So I strongly encourage that any game masters, give this to your players, this library data booklet when you're beginning the campaign. You can download both the library data and the handouts for free on the Mongoose website, so link below for that. Now, because this campaign is just simply too huge to cover in a single video, I'm going to be breaking this one up into a series. This video is only going to cover the initial setup and the first adventure, Bodysnatchers, with the other videos covering the different chapters later on. Now, because this video is going to include the campaign setup, I expect this one to be the longest of them. Who knows? We'll see how the future holds out on that. Now, also, this campaign is not perfect. There are some portions that are too vague, some are pretty damn railroady, there are some plot holes, there are some rather annoying mistakes that game masters should know about, so I'm going to be pointing these out as we go through it, and I'll be offering my suggestions and workarounds based off my own experience running this campaign. Now, in the time since my group has begun it, Mongoose has released both a prequel and sequel campaigns to it, Mysteries of the Ancients and Wrath of the Ancients. I have not run them myself, they are not necessary to run Secrets of the Ancients. This campaign was written as a standalone, and that's how we're going to be playing it. But I do need to acknowledge them as something that does exist now. So I feel that this campaign works much better without the prequel campaign. I feel Mysteries of the Ancients takes away from Secrets of the Ancients if it is used as a prequel. You can run that as its own campaign if you wish, but I really don't like it as a prequel. Also, this review is going to follow my campaign diary format, just like I did with my Two-Headed Serpent campaign, which was 9 episodes, and then the Mystery of BT-SHT 365, which was 5 episodes long, where we follow my group as they went through it, seeing how they overcame the obstacles and what silly hijinks they got into.
Oh, hell yes! It has been a while since we did one of these, though I ain't got to wear a stupid mask this time around, do I? Because in Two-Headed Serpent, I had to wear that rubber snake mask, and then in our last Traveler campaign, I had to wear that stiflingly hot wolf mask, so we ain't doing that again this time, right?
Hi, I'm Lily.
And I'm Benjamin.
Ah, crap.
Now, for full disclosure, we're not done playing this campaign yet. We've completed Chapter 6 so far, so I don't know when or how this campaign is even going to end for us. Hopefully the player characters are not killed before it's done now that I've started this whole review diary for it. Now, there might be a few plot elements that I'm not going to reveal right away in my campaign diary until my own group has discovered them. I don't want to spoil my own players by them watching a video and suddenly learning something that their characters haven't figured out yet. Okay, so all of that out of the way, Okay, let's introduce our player characters. First is Benjamin, retired naval captain and highly decorated officer who received a ship's pinnace when he mustered out. Next is Lily, former belter and pirate, serving as our pilot. And then Otto Otter Backett, former scout and spent some time in the Imperial Intelligence. And then Jasper Peachy Brevis, homeschooled scientist specializing in robotics and archaeology. He mustered out owning one half of a lab ship. Finally, JR, former merchant who grew up and escaped a red zone world. He also mustered out owning one half of a starship. They're joined by Killjag, a modified crew droid that Peachy rebuilt, and Squirt, an adorable speed sitter who keeps the ship free from vermin. Their ship is the Bex Halo, a heavily modified laboratory ship that they call home. Well, actually it's registered as Bex Halo, but JR had Bex Revenge painted on it because there's a small debate between him and Peachy as to what the ship should be named, but that is a completely different story.
And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things. You're playing all the different roles as we go from trying to make a couple bucks, to trying to clear our names, to trying to save the freaking galaxy.
But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. Send your game masters this way to see about running Secrets of the Ancients for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, you'll be branded a traitor of the Imperium. Okay, Game Masters, let's get this thing started. But first, let's talk about the setup for the campaign. I strongly recommend that you make the characters specifically for this campaign. First, at least one of the PCs needs to be related or a very close friend with an NPC named Vlyn Backett, or Uncle Vlyn as he's called. I prefer this picture of him from Mysteries of the Ancients because he just looks a lot kinder in it. In addition to him, there's several characters that suggest that you can use as contacts, allies, enemies, and rivals. All of them will appear in various chapters, and it works very well if their characters are already known to at least one of the PCs. Now, one thing, if the player characters do have Yasha as an enemy or rival, one thing that you must make clear to them is that the player characters have never met or seen Yasha himself. The reason being is that Yasha is also Vlyn Backett. Now, which of course they're going to learn that in Chapter 2 later on, but initially they shouldn't know that this is the same person. For our group, Otter was Vlyn's nephew, but Vlyn was also connected to Ben and JR's backstories as a close friend. I recommend connecting Vlyn to at least half of the party rather than just a single person. Coincidentally, both Otter and JR also had the mysterious Yasha as an enemy. Now, I recommend that each key NPC is known by at least one player character, either as a contact, ally, enemy, or rival that they rolled up during their character creation, or as one that you just give them once they start the campaign. Not only that, there are a few others that I would also recommend that you might consider adding if you're doing a lot of people and you don't want to keep using the same four over and over again. Harlan from Chapter 1, Baven Shar from Chapter 3, a criminal collector of ancient artifacts. Maybe any player characters with a history in archaeology or smuggling might have crossed him or worked with him before. Malakaut Tarvel in Chapter 8 might be known to any of the travelers who are nobles or in the archaeology field. And I really love how this campaign offers these NPCs as known characters because it makes the game feel a lot more personal if they're introduced during the adventure and the player can go like, oh yeah, I know that guy. Now, another thing that I did during character creation is that I required that all of the characters come from worlds that are in the Regina subsector, and this worked out absolutely great for us because the campaign takes place across several of these worlds, and as the player characters have been visiting them, I got to share with the player a bunch of information about their homeworld, the maps, culture, native creatures, major NPCs that are there, the history of it, and then that player could help me introduce that information to the rest of the group as their character is getting to show off whatever their homeworld is, and it's not just me as the game master telling them that. This is information that I give to the player, and the player gets to introduce a lot of that stuff as they're showing that off. Now, after character creation, we played the adventure Search and Rescue as a short job that they could do as Bex Halo was going through a massive refit at Afate Starport. It also got them some good starting cash that we could use to gear them up before the start of the campaign itself. Any game masters who might want to do that themselves, one change that I would suggest for doing that is moving Search and Rescue from being in the Gorham system to the Sias system, which is in the Regina subsector. Once at Afate, the player characters picked up their ship.
Sweet, our ship is now tricked out and ready for adventure. But wasn't my dear Uncle Vlyn supposed to show up for the big rechristening? Where is he?
The campaign itself opens with the player characters learning that their dear Uncle Vlyn has died on Regina. As they're named in Vlyn's information as emergency contacts, the travelers are then asked to come to Regina to claim his body and his effects.
Holy crap, not Uncle Flynn! This feels weirdly familiar, like in some former life when I was a washed-up detective working in Arkham.
Regina is a trinary system with the namesake planet being a moon of a gas giant. It's a high-tech, high-population world and the home of the sector's Duke. The book gives us this epic-length readout to the players as the introduction to this system, which has some really cool information in it, but Game Masters should summarize this and kind of give them the highlights versus reading all of this to them aloud, because you don't want to start your campaign out with putting all your players to sleep. The book also gives us this little anecdote about Regina from Uncle Flynn, so not wanting this to go to waste, I gave this to Otter as a story that he recalled Uncle Flynn telling him that he could then tell to everybody else as they entered the system. Being a major Class A starport, waiting to dock here can take hours as their ship queues up in line and they have to wait for everybody to go through before they're allowed to dock here. But once the Bex Halo identified themselves, they were then fast-tracked straight to the head of the line, a perk that's normally reserved for VIPs or visiting nobles, and that should be their first hint that something is going on here that's a little bit out of the ordinary. Upon docking, they're met with Chief Inspector Norrim of the Public Order Commission. He explains that Uncle Flynn was found shot in a TAS Hostel down on the planet Startown. He had high levels of the narcotic Tusol in his system and in his luggage, and his room appeared to have been torn apart and searched. The POC investigation is still ongoing here. Otter, being named next of kin, can pick up the body planet-side and received a travel voucher in Flynn's name for 100,000 credits to carry Uncle Flynn's body back to Alel for burial, which that's enough for any group that they don't have their own spacecraft, that they can all get them all the way to Alel there and carry Uncle Flynn. So it's not going to be any issue if the player characters don't have their own ship. Now, travelers, of course, are going to have a few questions for Inspector Norrim. Unfortunately for Game Masters, the answers aren't all right here or in one place. They're kind of spread around throughout the first chapter of the adventure. But key among them is Flynn arrived on the planet 3 days before his death on the ship the Great Eastern, which arrived from Rylanor. Also, the drug Tusol, the adventure gives no information about it in the text of the adventure, but the ship's library data pack does explain what Tusol is. And pretty much it's just space weed that you can chew and it can put you to sleep if you have too much. Now, we didn't discover that it was in the ship's library pack until after the first session. So until then, we didn't think there was any description whatsoever of what Tusol was. So we kind of made a few assumptions there, and that led to some kind of crazy rabbit trails that the player characters ended up following.
Okay guys, Uncle Flynn had a massive amount of Tusol in his system, and as we all know, Tusol is exactly like heroin, but like 1 billion times stronger. So why shoot him if he was already dying of an overdose? That don't make no sense. Unless there were 2 parties involved here. The first party gave him an overdose that stole something from his room, and the second party was an elite team of ninjas that then broke into his room and shot him in the chest. And until one of you can prove otherwise, I refuse to accept anything but this overcomplicated theory. Anyway, Game Masters, the moral here is that you need to check the library data booklet for any information. For example, Tusol is described in there. And also give one of these data packets to each of your players to represent their ship's library. There is a ton of great information in there, and it might save you the headache of your players making up little rabbit trails for themselves, providing that the players even bother reading through it. But if they don't, you can tell them that they should have done that, and that is their fault. Now, another detail that I missed when I ran this is that there was supposed to be a lot of Tusol discovered at the scene, like several kilos being hidden in Vlynn's luggage, making it appear that Vlynn might have been smuggling drugs. Now, when I did this, I just kind of had it like a small baggie was worth, but no, it should have been like several bricks were actually inside his luggage and whatnot. Now, down planet side, the player characters visited the corner and signed for Uncle Vlynn's cryo-frozen body. There they received back its effects, including some cash, his task card. However, I removed his personal comm from this list. Reason being is that anyone could have taken that comm and used that to track all his calls and his movements before he died, so I had the criminals take that and dispose of it at the time that they killed him. I also made a coroner's report handout for my players, and in it, I also mentioned that Uncle Flynn had no detectable augmentations and traces of anagathics in his system, despite records showing him to be almost 3 times his apparent age. That's just a little bit of foreshadowing that the
player characters are going to be discovering in Chapter 2 and later on. Now, any game masters that want copies of the handouts that I made for our game, you can download those at the link below in the video description. Feel free to use them and have fun. From there, the heroes visited the TAS Hostel where Vlin's body was discovered. It's the oldest TAS Hostel in Regina, and while there's normally pretty nice places that, have a lot of nice amenities there, this one is a rundown crap hole. I mean, there's, different parasites that are in the different beds that you could get if you stay there. I mean, this is just a decrepit place. But there's a bit of prestige for the people that want to stay in that one because it was the first one in Regina. There they learned that on the night of Vlin's death, he had brought 3 guests inside. One was a thin guy with reddish hair, and then there were 2 big bruiser guys with him. The little guy went to Vlin's room for several hours, and then one of the big bruisers left for a bit and came back. Now, eventually, all 3 men left with some things under their arms, but before leaving, they reported a spilled drink in the room, which deployed a cleaning bot that then discovered Beckett's body was shot inside. Now, about this same time that the bot discovered it and that ambulance call went out, the mysterious power outage hit the TAS Hostel and knocking out the surveillance systems. Now, if the travelers go through looking through the footage, they're going to see that it's really low quality and grainy. Now, I say that you have it be difficult to make out the details in all of this video footage, not because the cameras are old and low resolution. I mean, they're still going to be far future cameras, right? They're going to be super ultra high resolution, but have them be where they're kind of glitchy and difficult to make out any of the details due to that Ancients device that the bad guys used to create the power outage. It wiped out a significant portion of all the surveillance footage, and that's why it's difficult to make everything out. And the person at the TAS Hostel can say, like, I don't know why that is. We've got these great cameras, but we can't make anything out, or it kind of glitches out at certain parts. And you can just make that be something that happened because of the Ancients device versus they've got these low resolution cameras, even though they're thousands of years in the future.
Yeah, this is weird. Why shoot a guy, then call room service to find the body? Again, I think Uncle Vlin was alive when they left the room. And then, a second group of ninjas broke in here and shot him while he was down. I think we should check the roof and the windows for points of entry.
Eventually, Peachy just called in the cleaning bot into the room, and then using his robotic skills, he opened it up and he accessed its memory files, and he confirmed that Vlin was definitely shot before the bot arrived in the room and called the ambulance, moments before the power outage took it out.
Okay, so it looks like there was only one party, and they're the ones that shot Uncle Vlin, but why kill the guy and then notify the authorities that there's a body in the room? This don't make no sense.
Lily decided to hit the streets and ask around. She discovered that a local Tusal dealer named Darian Jack had been bragging that night about how he had sold this huge amount of Tusal that night and made a pretty big score. She tried to meet with him, but no one was able to reach him, so she ended up paying a guy at a bar that Darian Jack frequents to give her a call if he shows up there. Meanwhile, JR went out for some food and was approached on the street by this sketchy, nervous guy claiming to know who killed Vlin Backett. He introduced himself as Detective Odoy and said that Vlin Backett was murdered by the notorious criminal Yasha. Now, this detective is clearly agitated and paranoid, and the police have placed him on psychological leave, which Odoy claims is all part of the conspiracy by Yasha because he'd been getting too close to him.
Yasha? That dude tried to kill me once. Okay, detective, you are clearly crazy, but I believe you, so we'll let you know if we find anything out.
Ben and Lily, deciding that they didn't want to stay in the seedy TAS Hostel, wanted to sleep in a nicer hotel because, they'd been on their ship for a few weeks and they wanted to stay there somewhere pretty nice. So as they were walking to this hotel, Lily noticed that there was a man following her down the street. So she tucked into an alley and waited for this man. And then as he was passing, she reached out and grabbed him and put him in a lock and demanded that he tell her who he was. Then the man revealed himself to be a cop.
Whoa, 5-0, why are you following us?
Let me handle this one. Why are you dicks following us? Do you know who I am? I will have your badge for this.
Benjamin tried de-escalating the situation as police drones and backup started swarming in, almost as if they had been there waiting in reserve for something to happen, because they were all of a sudden everywhere very, very quickly. Unfortunately, the player rolled a snake eyes on that roll, so that skill check completely failed, and that ended up landing both of them in jail. The next morning, a TAS employee forwarded to Otter a message from a Professor Ujinka from the University of Regina that had been received and sent to Uncle Vlin. She just returned planetside and had some business that she wanted to discuss with Vlin. Now, Peachy knew the professor from his past as an authority on the Ancients. Meanwhile, Ben and Lily were released from jail. Their charges of assaulting a police officer had been mysteriously changed to a public intoxication, and then all the charges were dropped altogether.
Guys, it is really weird that they would let you go after just a single night here. I mean, that library data that we got at the start of the campaign clearly states that the Regina authorities are known to detain people for up to 30 days without even pressing any charges against them, and that travelers are very likely to get caught up by this. So why on earth would they let you go after just a single night and not press any charges against you? That don't make no sense at all. So I'm just going to loudly declare that this was plot armor by Seth because he didn't want two of his players to miss out on the next part of this campaign, just discourage any future discussion about how weird that was. I am sure this is not going to come back and bite us in the ass.
Professor Ujinka lives in Dankado, the Duke's private reserve, where only the most wealthy and influential people are permitted to live there. Now, regular grav vehicles are banned there, meaning that you have to use a ground car or actually maybe use horses to get around, so the travelers rented a ground car and started heading over. Now, the professor's house is this large walled estate with a private pond and is patrolled by security drones. We get a map of the house, though the map completely lacks windows, and those are going to be kind of important here, so with a little Photoshop, I added some to this map. Professor Ujinka was very upset to learn of Lynn's death because he'd offered to help fund a project for a device that could detect Ancient's technology, which usually that's invisible to scanners. There's no way that anybody could ever find out where Ancient's tech is unless they just stumble across it physically. So having a device that could actually sense that's a pretty big deal. She said that the Ancient's detector was being built by a Dr. Junie Volsang at a dig site at Beck's World, and this was a known contact for both Peachy and Lily as somebody that they knew from their backstories.
Well, Professor, we would love to help you out with this. I mean, it's what Uncle Flynn would have wanted. Never mind the potential billions worth of credits of artifacts that this thing could discover.
But about then, the power at the house flipped off. And not just the house itself, but all electronics, the drones, the travelers' computers, everything above tech level 8 was dead. Then a shot smashed through one of the windows, killing Professor Ujinka.
Holy crap! I'm going to check the body and make sure she's still alive.
You do that. I'm going to go hide in another room.
Now what's going on here is this is a pair of goons that were sent by Harlan to clean up any loose threads involving Uncle Flynn. Now it's only coincidence that the travelers arrived at this time when then they were taking out this professor. Now this portion is pretty damned railroady because one of the goons is intended to somehow escape and then ended up getting captured by the police, while the other is intended to be captured by the player characters and interrogated. So I made a few changes to this to allow that to happen much more naturally. First, I made it 3 goons. Gaius Labre was positioned across the pond, and after disabling the power with his Ancient's device, he shot the professor with a Gauss rifle, putting him about 300 meters away and across the lake from the house in a sniper position that should allow him to escape safely because the player characters can't get right up on him. Meanwhile, the other 2 goons started breaking into the house. Now, Ben was the last to hit the floor, and he ended up taking a serious injury from a Gauss round that came in through the window. Now, being a strict law-level world, the travelers probably don't have much in the way of weaponry here because just about everything here is banned. So any electronics that are above tech level 8, those are also going to be currently out. But a quick search of this room is going to spot 2 antique sword worlder swords that are on the wall. I also added a pair of ornate dueling pistols that were in a case on another wall there, which JR grabbed those pistols. What followed was a dramatic fight with Ben leaping off a balcony, sword in hand, and then JR jamming his antique flintlock against a bad guy's head and snarling, "Who has it?" I don't know if this gun is possibly loaded or not, or what it could possibly be, but I'm about to find out who's got it. Once the 2 goons in the house had been subdued, Peachy managed to get one of the drones back online, and he sent it after Gaius Labre, who was across the lake. But then Gaius drew what looked like a magic wand out of his jacket, and with a flick of his wrist, the drone lost power and dropped into the lake. Peachy managed to get another one of the drones back up, and holding back a discreet distance, he managed to track Gaius to where he had climbed over the wall of the property and was fleeing to where his car was. But then he saw that Gaius was being arrested by the same plain-suited police officers who had arrested Lily and Benjamin the night before, and then they just flew away in an unmarked police air car. Interrogating the 2 goons at the house, the player characters learned that they worked for a man named Harlan, a lieutenant under Yasha. They were ordered to murder this professor once she returned to Regina, but hadn't expected the player characters to be there, and they didn't know why it was they were going to be killing her. They disabled the power with some sort of weird gadget that Harlan had given Gaius, and Peachy was able to identify it through having seen it through the drone and by the description that these guys gave that this this was some sort of Ancients technology that they had. The goon verified that it was Harlan who had killed Vlin Backett, though the goon didn't know why he had killed Vlin Backett because they seemed to be pretty good friends. The goon had picked up a bunch of Tusol at Harlan's request and then waited outside the room. Then Harlan shot Uncle Vlin, reported the spill to the room, then using the Ancients gadget disabled the building's power and cameras. Harlan also removed a small statue, some tapes from Vlin Backett's room. The goon said that they didn't know how to get a hold of Harlan directly, that they only spoke to him through a middleman, a dandelion named Exceedingly Discreet, who operated out of a company called Winter Shipping. The player characters called the local police, who then showed up, took the player characters' statements and took the two goons away, and Ben was taken to a hospital to heal his massive injuries that he had taken from that sniper round. On the drive back to the starport, the travelers received a call from Detective Odoy, saying how that those police who had arrested Ben and Lily the night before were not cops as far as he could tell. In fact, the entire police report only showed that they had been picked up for a very minor intoxication charge with no record of Lily attacking a police officer or anyone. Odoy also told them that there was no record of any police air car out at Professor Ujinka's house, and being the ban on the grav vehicles in the area that's on the Duke's Reserve, it would have required some sort of official authorization for any vehicles to be out there, and there would have been a record of flight paths and anything like that, but there wasn't any record at all. So Odoy had told him that he had heard a rumor that Imperial Intelligence was working some big secret case going on, but he knew nothing about this outside of a Captain Gan Holsis had arrived in a ship called the Alahir, and that's when everybody in the POC jumped to attention and started following his orders.
Gand Holsis? Aw man, I know that chick. He and I have got a bad history together. Yeah, same here. That guy and I hate each other.
Now what's going on here is Imperial Intelligence, led by Captain Gant Halsis, was investigating Glenn Backett for several things, including possible terrorism and possibly being an enemy of the Imperium. His agents, posing as Regina police officers, had been following the travelers since they arrived planetside, hoping that they might lead them somewhere, and it was just an unfortunate mistake that Lily had spotted and captured one of them. So the arrest report vanished because the policeman wasn't an actual police officer. He was just posing as a police officer. And then the charges all dropped, so Imperial Intelligence can continue their surveillance of them because it did them no good if the travelers are just rotting in a jail cell for the next 30 days. Also, both Lily and Benjamin now have micro-trackers that were hidden in their clothes when they went to jail, but neither of them bothered looking for that until after they had left the system, so they didn't know that they had them on them. Now, fortunately for the player characters, the Ancients device that knocked out all the electronics at Professor Ujinka's house also disabled those trackers at the same time. However, Benjamin, who went to the hospital to get surgery and ended up taking a lot of fast healing drugs, while he was under, Imperial Intelligence placed a micro-tracker under his skin, though Benjamin's not going to figure that out until a couple chapters later. But the short of it is that Gand Hostis suspects the player characters of being in league with a suspected terrorist, and he already has negative opinions of some of the travelers due to the characters' backstories. So anything weird going on around the travelers, he's just going to assume the worst and link all that to the fact that they are possibly aiding a terrorist or possibly in league with them. Now, meanwhile, Otter got a call from a wealthy droid who learned that Otter was the inheritor of Lynn Backett's estate. This droid told him that a few months ago he was on his way to an auction at Rylanor to purchase an Ancient's idol, but there was an attack on his ship that disabled their jump drive, forcing him to miss this auction. Once he arrived, he later learned that Lynn Backett had won this idol for 750,000 credits, which was a huge deal for him because this droid, had he been there, he would have bid it against him, and probably this would have gone up a lot higher. Shortly after winning the auction, Vlin had headed off to Regina, but because Uncle Vlin is now dead, the droid is offering Otter 1 million credits for this statue if he has it.
1 million credits? Holy crap. Oh, no problem at all, boss. I don't know where that idol is right now, but once I find it, you will be the first to know.
Now, this was something that I added to the adventure. First, it was a good way to introduce the droid because they're a really huge part of this campaign, so I wanted to introduce them as just parts of the Traveler universe before the player characters have to interact with them for the campaign reasons. Second, a promise of treasure is always a great motivator to players. And third, this story introduces to the player characters a little bit about Uncle Vlin's shady activities, which is going to become a much bigger thing in Chapter 2, but it kind of starts giving the first hints that Uncle Vlin might have been a little bit shady. Otter received a call from Inspector Norrim saying that they had made an arrest in Vlin Backett's murder, a small-time drug dealer known as Darian Darien Jack. Now, the player characters know that Darien Jack didn't do it because they had already interrogated that one goon, but the inspector seems strangely eager to close this case and get it behind him, which the truth behind that is Imperial Intelligence has ordered him to close this case out as soon as possible, but the player characters know that they've got the wrong guy for this murder, and even though Darien Jack is a killer and a bad guy, he's not who killed Uncle Flynn.
I tell you guys, it is always a conspiracy with these jerks. They don't give two craps about whatever the truth really is. That crazy Detective Odoy dude, he is the only sane one among them. You can see where that got him.
Researching winter shipping, they discovered that this was a fence for stolen goods and a predatory business that essentially offers payday loans to desperate ship captains for just ridiculously high interest rates or other costs. Now, I made this little ad for my players that I gave to them, and I stuck a link down in the video description for any game masters that can download this and use this for their own campaign if they would like to. Now, how this investigation goes is completely up to your players. The adventure also offers us several ways that they might attempt this, ranging from a direct to stealthy, investigative, and so on. I like that this adventure isn't forcing or expecting any one approach, but it still offers game masters suggestions on the various methods and ways that this could be done or the player characters might attempt. Now, one thing that the adventure does not suggest, but I really do encourage game masters to consider, is researching Harlan himself. The book gives us some information about how he was a scientist and an expert in telecommunications and is very cold and possibly a sociopath, but there's no real way for the player characters to learn all this on their own or learn this at all. So I suggest that allowing the characters to research Harlan, possibly from, finding out about his old employers or interviewing his old coworkers before Harlan fell off the grid, maybe asking Detective Odoy to, call his contacts and research him and kind of get a little bit of information, kind of start building up a profile. That way Harlan becomes a person to them in their minds before they meet him. Now, surveying the business, the player characters figured out that there was an underground passage leading between the offices on either side of the starport wall, essentially a secret tunnel that they were going to transport different goods back and forth. Now, Exceedingly Discreet, who is a wonderful character and is a living computer and knows all the information that Yasha wouldn't trust to put on a regular computer, he serves as their kind of memory databanks. Now, he lives up on the second floor of their starport side office in an environmentally sealed apartment whenever he's not down working, where he wears a spacesuit, and he rarely, if ever, leaves this building. This is a really cool character, a very alien personality with some really cool tips on playing him, and it really bummed me out that my players completely avoided meeting Exceedingly Discreet because they didn't want anybody to know that they were looking into it. So, kind of a wasted opportunity, but they did a great job looking up this place because they never got caught. Lily broke into Winter Shipping's shuttle hangar and searched its logs, figuring out that the shuttle takes regular trips up to a massive container storage facility in orbit, and there are a bunch of containers that have literally been there for centuries. Nobody goes to this place because a lot of them are just massive containers and there's just thousands of them there. But before she left the hangar, she decided to check out some of the crates that might be getting shipped off in the shuttle, and we rolled randomly, and then we discovered that she found 1 ton of pharmaceuticals, which she then swapped that crate out for a crate of literal trash that she got out of a dumpster, and she liberated a forklift and carried that 1 ton crate of pharmaceuticals back to their own craft.
Okay guys, we got 1 ton of stolen cargo, you're welcome for that by the way, and a location up in orbit of a hidden space station. Now all the cops around here are stupid jerks, so I say we just go on up there, check out the hidden container yard to see what's there, and get the hell out of this system.
Returning to the Beck's Halo, Benjamin deployed a probe drone to fly into this massive orbiting shipyard of unused shipping containers, and following the records that they had lifted off of the Winter Shipping shuttle computer, they discovered a secret space station made out of shipping containers. With some seriously great rolls here, they identified that the sensor array was tech level 16 and that the station had a hidden weapons pop-up turret.
Guys, there is no way we're going to be able to sneak up on this station without alerting that turret. And I don't know what weapons are going to be loaded on that thing, so let's just assume they're going to be the nastiest weapons ever conceived of in the galaxy. This is hopeless.
Not to be dissuaded, Benjamin suggested that he approach the station alone from the opposite side wearing a vac suit, and he crosses the 500-meter open span between it and the nearest container, hoping that the sensors that are so advanced are not just going to notice him. And then once he gets to the station, he's going to crawl down to the sensor antenna and then with his static blade sword, chop them up and blind the station.
Great plan, huh?
As a learned man of science, that is the stupidest plan I have ever heard.
I say we go with plan B. You're a decorated military strategist, so strategize us away into that station.
Donning vac suits, everyone piled into Otter's air raft and approached the station, stopping at the nearest shipping container. And then Benjamin, having some great tactics and leadership roles here, they then used the docking codes that Lily had stolen off the winter shipping shuttle. They pulled off a great task chain for just gunning to the station across that final open spans and then hitting the codes about halfway across and then, making it safely into the hangar as the doors were just open enough to allow clearance, right as the pop-up turrets were coming out and emerging from their thing. The player characters made it inside and nobody got a shot off at them. Now, inside was a pretty much straight assault. There were 8 or so goons aboard that were armed with snub pistols and vac suits, though I upgraded 3 of them to being snub submachine guns just to make it a little bit interesting. Now, this was a great fight. One deck had gravity and another deck didn't have gravity, and the player characters managed to subdue and zip tie almost all of the goons. I think they only killed one of the goons here. The rest of them they managed to tie up and turn into prisoners. Now, as the fight was nearing its end, Harlan, the second in command of Yasha, emerged from his office, Gauss pistol in hand.
There you are, you son of a bitch. You got some explaining to do.
Harlan instantly recognized the player characters, his gaze falling on Otter, and Otter saw that recognition in his eyes. Now, what the player characters don't know is that Yasha has specifically ordered Harlan not to harm the travelers because his plan requires that they take Uncle Vlin's body back to Alel. So, realizing that he's been caught and the secret station has been compromised, Harlan made his decision. He mutters, "This is suboptimal." Then his eyes kind of click upwards, issuing a mental command to detonate the station with his neural implants. And then he jammed a pistol in his mouth and blew out his own brains.
What the hell was that all about?
Who says suboptimal?
Aw, crap. This is bad.
With only 3 minutes before the station self-destructs, the travelers raided Harlan's office, discovering the statue and some data tapes of Uncle Vlin's, and then they race back to their air raft. Now, this should be a frantic scene, so have gravity go offline, then the lights go out, maybe some explosive decompression. Now, any of Harlan's goons that attempt to use the life escape pods are going to find out that these don't work for them. Though any player characters that attempt to use the life escape pods, they are going to be able to. So, and the reason being that Harlan wants all of his minions, all of his evidence, all of that to be scrubbed, though he wants the travelers to be able to get away here, so that's why everything will work for the travelers and it won't work for the bad guys. So the travelers, as they were getting out of there, they could hear over the radio these goons who had managed to get out of their bonds and are screaming curses at Harlan's name because none of the life escape pods were working. Now the travelers jetted out of there just as the station exploded, destroying all evidence of Yasha's shady dealings. Now, one thing that I added here is at the same time that the station exploded, the winter shipping offices and starport hangar that they had, those also exploded, killing everyone inside and destroying all the evidence. Now the travelers, of course, they didn't see what was going down at the downport below, but they heard about all this stuff going on comms because the downport went on lockdown because of all these explosions that suddenly happened, as well as sensors reading that there was an explosion up in orbit up where the shipping containers are. So the travelers got to hear that everything exploded all at the same time. Now once they reached Beck's Halo, they jumped away toward Alel to bury Uncle Vlin. Overall, we had a lot of fun with this adventure. It took us about 14 hours of playtime to complete once the player characters had reached Regina and we could officially start it. There's obviously a lot of moving parts to this scenario. Any investigative scenario's got quite a bit of moving parts, and this is definitely one of those. And it took off to a bit of a rough start at first because my players investigating the correct path versus just chasing their tails at first. And I really wish that I had found that description of Tusal in the ship's library handout just up front because I didn't know what it was. So I originally said that it was a really powerful painkiller, and my players took that and they interpreted that as being like fentanyl. Also, make sure that you mention that Uncle Vlin was found with a couple kilos of this stuff hidden in his effects, like he might have been smuggling these drugs, and maybe that was the source of why he was murdered. Be sure to bring in Detective Odoy once they've checked their initial leads. Don't bring him in too early, but also before the players might become frustrated trying to figure out what their next step could possibly be. Really play up his paranoia. This man is not sane, he's clearly unstable, but he's also not wrong about there being a conspiracy involved. Now, speaking of that, really lean into this aspect of the player characters being followed by Imperial agents. And, if the player characters, they spot and they capture an agent, much like Mai did, a rescue team is going to quickly come and get that agent out of there, which, if the player characters get arrested, I also suggest doing what I did, where the charges mysteriously disappear or changed kind of suddenly to some minor infraction with no records at all of what they might have been arrested for, and then releasing the player characters back out into the wild with some tracking devices hidden in their clothes. Now, unless they go into a hospital or surgery like Benjamin did, then they can have Imperial Intelligence implant one of those under their skin without the player character's knowledge. Now, one thing that I feel that the adventure needs is a detailed timeline of events between Uncle Vlin arriving on Regina up until his murder. It's mostly all in there, but it's spread out through different sections, making it really difficult to navigate quickly in-game in order to find information as the player characters begin asking questions and looking things up. So, Game Masters, I really suggest that you make yourself a timeline of events. That way you've got all those answers right there and can answer any questions that the players might have as they're looking into this. Another area that I found difficult in-game is the information on the drug dealer Darian Jack. There's no section that is just about him, and most of the information appears in the section when Inspector Norrim calls to say that they found Vlin's killer and they're closing the investigation out. But the players, they might be looking into Darian Jack long before that. My characters, they were looking into him on the first night. So go ahead and put some information together about him, or at least mark where that is. That way you can reference that in-game and not have to kind of flounder and search around or kind of make something up that then you have to keep consistent later on. So just note that down, because it isn't that easy to find. And Game Masters, be prepared that your players might not investigate or discover this connection with Winter Shipping and Harlan. Hopefully they will, because Uncle Vlin should have been somebody that was important to their characters, but they might just simply get down here and get the body and leave everything up to the cops and just try to leave. So use Detective Odoy and Professor Ujinka as a way to push the narrative forward and try to get them involved in the investigation and let them know. As I've talked about before when I talked about mystery games, one of the first things you need to do is let them know that this is a mystery adventure and not have the players have that be a mystery that they should figure out that they're in a mystery game. But if they don't, you can use these NPCs to help push that along and get the player characters involved in the story rather than just picking up the body and heading off to Vlin's home. Also consider adding something like the joint collector that I did, who was interested in that ancient statue that Vlin had picked up at auction. However, in my game, I also had where the joint collector left the system shortly after meeting with Otto. So when the player characters, when they recover the statue, if they do get a hold of him, they're going to have to arrange it where they meet up somewhere. And that can take, several weeks to do, with mailboats carrying messages back and forth, which, depending on when that is in the campaign that they can meet with him and deliver the statue and get paid, the travelers might be really, really desperate for that money at that point. Now, on the flip side, if the player characters don't seem to be any sort of rush on leaving Regina, you can have the inheritors family back home start messaging them of when it is they expect to be arriving on a lull with Uncle Vlin's body, because they're trying to arrange the funeral and everything and trying to get everybody together for that. For example, it was like the morning of the second day when my brother started messaging me going, "Hey, when is it you're going to be arriving here? Because I'm trying to get all aunts and uncles and everybody together." And that's a good way of getting the player characters to commit to a date of when it is they're going to leave. Now, the characters do not need to recover the statue and tapes for the station. It doesn't hurt the campaign if they don't find them in Chapter 1. The tapes are a really important part of the campaign, but another copy of those can be found in Chapter 2. So if they miss them in Chapter 1, no big deal, they can find them later on. Now, the module mentions this, but the important information that I want to give my players as a handout so they can reference this, possibly weeks or months later as we're playing this. So I reworked this note from Chapter 2 into a handout, removing the reference of the note, but also adding some information such as the auction on Rylanor and the note of the gas giant Komesh, which, once again, any handouts that I made, you can find a link in the video description below if you want to use those in your game. Again, Harlan is the main bad guy for this chapter, but it really isn't any mention of how to research him or find out information about him. Any public records of Winter Shipping or using Detective Odoy might be a good idea of getting some information on Harlan and kind of figure out who it is they're going to be dealing with. Now, preventing Harlan from blowing up the station once he realizes that he's been caught, that is almost impossible to do. It's a mental switch after all, so he can just do that with his brain. But, we might also have a mentally activated suicide switch if the player characters are able to grapple the gun away from him and prevent him from killing himself. himself. But, the travelers, though, they might surprise you. They might drop in and stun him before he even knows that they're there and prevent him from taking his own life and manage to disable any cyber or anything before he wakes up. So for my game, I had him emerge from his office and assess the situation and set that destruct code and take his own life on his initiative turn in a combat round. So it was his turn, and all of this stuff happened during his round, when it was his turn to go. And that worked perfectly for us. But Game Masters, you might want to have Harlan set that self-destruct sequence and take his own life in some dramatic way yourself, just depending on, however it is that your group ends up confronting him, because once again, this can go a lot of different ways. I was just really lucky that it worked out in that dramatic fashion. Now, speaking of the self-destruct sequence, there are escape capsules on the station, and just depending on how your game goes, the travelers might need to use one of those. However, being a super secret base, where do these capsules go, right? Like, they just go slinging down, willy-nilly with little distress beacons on them, because, they can't do that, because otherwise, criminals aboard are going to get picked up by the Regina authorities, and the Regina authorities are going to figure out where they came from. So I suggest having these pods, if they get used, maybe they're stealthed, or maybe they're aimed at a specific spot on the planet where the occupants can be rescued, or maybe they've already got cars or something there, some sort of escape vehicle. So once they hit the surface, they then get in this vehicle and get out of there before anybody can find out, who they are, where they came from. Or maybe you could change it where the escape pods aren't just pods that go down to the planet, but maybe these small two-person things that you could pilot, right? And the travelers could get in one of these and fly off and go anywhere they choose before the air runs out, because they're, of emergency escape vehicles. So they don't have all the amenities like recycling air. Okay, well, that is it for this episode. Between covering the campaign setup and all the aspects of this being an investigative adventure, I expect that this is going to be the longest episode in the series, but time will tell on that. The next episode will be attending a funeral and meeting some unwanted guests in Chapter 2, Homecoming.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, or how-tos, or even more of this series on Secrets of the Ancients, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, travelers, you have a great day. Peachy's player put a lot of work into upgrading the ship before we started the campaign, and we even had these little mission patches made that say Beck's Halo and Beck's Revenge on them that are on all of our little outfits, and then we had a 3D model of the ship printed up before the first session. It would be a real shame if something bad happened to our ship at the next adventure. Real shame.